It's time for Fresh Oil with singer-songwriter and pastor Keith Manley, a program designed to minister the gospel of God's grace and to bring fresh oil to the brokenhearted. And now, with today's program, Pastor Keith Manley.
Welcome back to Fresh Oil. I'm Pastor Keith Manley. We're in our second day of a series I call Forgotten Women of the Genealogy. It's based on a book I wrote called The Genealogy of Hope, where I talk about the 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And today we meet the second of our 5 women. And her story, if anything, even more unlikely than Tamar's. Her name is Rahab. And Matthew chapter 1, verse 5 gives her exactly this much attention. Salmon begat Boaz by Rahab. That's it. But the story behind those words is enough to fill a week of programs on its own. Let me begin with her name, because names matter in Scripture. And this one is worthy to listen to. In Hebrew, her name is Rachav. And the root means broad or wide or spacious. Some scholars have suggested an irony in that a woman whose very name suggests openness and expansiveness lived in the most closed and most fortified, most militarily hardened city in the ancient land of Canaan. That's Jericho. The city with walls that were so thick that houses were built inside them. The city that stood directly between the people of Israel and the Promised Land. And the first stronghold that would have to fall before Israel would take what God had given them. And inside that wall, literally inside the wall, was the house of a woman who sold her body for money, who was known by every soldier and traveler who passed through, and who was about to become one of the most celebrated figures of faith in the entire New Testament. Let me take you to Joshua chapter 2. Because we need to understand what happened before we can appreciate what it means, how this woman wound up in the genealogy of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. Israel is camped on the east side of the Jordan River. They're preparing to cross over and begin their conquest of Canaan. Joshua, the new leader of Israel, since Moses died, sends 2 spies into the land, specifically into Jericho, to access what they were up against and what they were going to face when they came in to take the city. And these 2 spies somehow ended up in the house of Rahab. What an unlikely place for 2 Jewish spies. Now, commentators have offered practical reasons for this. A house of that kind, a place where strangers came and went regularly, was a natural cover for intelligence gathering. Nobody would notice 2 more men coming through. But I want you to see that there was nothing accidental about this from God's perspective. These 2 men didn't choose Rahab's house. They were guided there. God knew what was in Rahab's heart before he spoke a single word. And when the king of Jericho heard that Israelite spies had been seen entering the city, he sent officers to Rahab's door with a direct order: bring out the men who came to you. And Rahab had already hidden the 2 spies under the stalks of flax that were drying on her roof. And she told the officers, yes, these men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be shut at dark, they left. Go after them quickly. You can catch them. And the king's men went out chasing a false trail while the spies lay hidden on the roof above her head. Now, here's where the story pivots from a rescue operation to theological confession. When Rahab went to speak to the spies, she said something that no one in her position, with her history, with her background, would have ever been expected to say. I want to read it to you today from Joshua 2, verses 9 through 11, because it deserves to be heard in full. She said this: I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth below. Now stop. Let that settle in. She's a Canaanite woman, a pagan. She's never crossed the Red Sea. She has never heard Moses preach. She's never been to a synagogue or a tabernacle. She has no covenant heritage, no religious training, no social respectability. And she just made one of the most powerful declarations of monotheistic faith in the entire Old Testament. The Lord your God, He is God in heaven and on earth below. Wow. Reminds me of the Shema, where the Jews pray every day. Hear, O Israel, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And that was declared by Moses to the covenant people of Israel. But Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute, she says essentially the same thing from behind a wall on the other side of the Jordan. See, faith does not require a perfect background. It requires an honest heart and a willing response to what God has made known. Rahab had heard the reports about the God of Israel, and instead of diminishing them the way the neighbors did, she let them break through every barrier inside her and believed. That is faith, friend. That's exactly what the New Testament means when it says that faith comes by hearing. She made a covenant with the spies. She would keep their secret. She wouldn't betray them. And in exchange, when Israel came to take the city, she and every member of her household who sheltered with her would be spared. And the sign she gave was a cord, a scarlet cord, a crimson cord. And in Hebrew, it's called tikva shani, which some translate as a cord of scarlet thread. Now here's where it gets theologically rich. The Hebrew word tikva, it can mean a cord or a rope, but it also is the primary Hebrew word for hope. Tikva means hope. That when you hope in the Lord, it's like wrapping a rope or a cord. It's the word used in Jeremiah 29:11 behind the phrase that He has good plans for you, plans for a future and a hope. That's tikva. It's the word used when Rachel said she hoped for a son. It's the word at the heart of Israel's national anthem called the Hatikvah that they sing, the hope. Rahab's sign of deliverance was a cord of scarlet hope hanging in a window. You cannot read that without your mind going to Passover, to the blood on the doorposts that marked the houses of the living while death passed over them. You can't read it from this side of the cross without seeing the shadow of the blood of Christ shed as the ultimate sign of redemption, the ultimate cord of hope hung between heaven and earth so that everyone who shelters beneath it will be saved. The scarlet thread that led all the way to the cross. The walls of Jericho fell. The Bible tells us that in Joshua chapter 6. The city was destroyed, everything living in it, except one household, and that was the household of Rahab. The spies had told Rahab to gather her family inside and to keep the scarlet cord in the window, and Joshua 6:25 says, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her father's household and all who belonged to her, and she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day. Wow, in the midst of Israel, not on the outskirts, not on probation, not in the section for former pagans who are being carefully monitored. She's lived in the midst of God's people. She married a man named Salmon, who may well have been one of the two spies that she sheltered. We don't know, but it's possible, though the text doesn't confirm that. And they had a son named Boaz. And Boaz became the kinsman redeemer of Ruth, whose story we'll tell tomorrow. I just finished doing a whole series on Ruth. And Boaz and Ruth have a son named Obed, and Obed had Jesse, and from Jesse came David, and from David, as Matthew carefully traces it, came Jesus, the Messiah. See, the New Testament honors Rahab in 3 places. 3 times she's lifted up by name, not apologized for, not qualified, not introduced with a disclaimer about her past, but Hebrews 11:31 places Rahab in the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Faith alongside Abraham, Moses, Gideon, and David. And it says this, By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. And James 2:25 uses her as the central example of faith that expresses itself in works. Not faith as abstract belief, but faith as active, costly, risky response to what God has said. And Matthew 1:5 gives her a seat in the genealogy of the Messiah. Now, I want to speak directly to something pastoral before we close today, because Rahab's story, it raises a question that I think many people carry privately and rarely speak about. Can God really use someone with my history? Not a tidy little history of minor mistakes and small regrets, but a real history, a history with chapters that you've never read aloud to anyone, a history that if someone knew the whole of it, you're not sure they'd still be sitting in the pew or listening to this broadcast. Can God, who sees all of it, who has never been fooled by any of it, can that God actually write your name into something significant? Rahab says yes. Not as a theological, abstract perspective, as a historical fact. The woman who was known in Jericho for the one thing she is most ashamed of was known in heaven for the one thing she's most honored for. She believed the reports about God, and she acted on that belief at personal risk. And she hung a scarlet thread in her window, and she trusted the promise of deliverance. My friend, whatever it is in your history, God's not surprised by it. He's not embarrassed by it. He saw it before you were ever born, and He included you in His plans anyway. The cord of crimson hope, it's not reserved for people with clean records. It never was. Rahab's window is proof of that. I want to tell you today, friend, God has a plan for your life. Tomorrow on Fresh Oil, we're going to conclude this series with perhaps the most beloved story in all of the 5. It's one that I just recently wrote, the book of Ruth, and I did an entire series at Grace Family Church, which I thought would take 1 week, and I'm already on week number 4. It's the story of Ruth, a Moabite widow, whose declaration of loyalty to her mother-in-law became one of the most quoted speeches in all of Scripture, and whose love story with a man named Boaz is one of the most complete pictures of the gospel you'll find anywhere in the pages of the Old Testament. We're going to be talking about Ruth tomorrow. But friend, if you're listening today and you're thinking, wow, Keith, you don't know my story. I've messed up bad. I have things that I wish had never happened in my life. I want you to know today that God has a plan for you, friend, and it's a good plan. Walk in grace. He loves you. He really does.
What if the family tree of Jesus wasn't filled with perfect people, but broken, scandal-marked, courageous women? In The Genealogy of Hope, 5 women who changed everything, author Keith Manley brings to life the powerful stories of Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary, 5 unlikely women woven into the lineage of Christ. A woman who risked everything for justice, a prostitute who chose faith over fear, a foreigner who found redemption, a grieving mother who carried sorrow, and a teenage girl who said yes to the impossible. This is not a genealogy of perfection, it's a genealogy of hope. Discover how God writes straight with crooked lines, and how your story can be redeemed too. The Genealogy of Hope by Keith Manley.
Check out my new book, The Genealogy of Hope, available now on Amazon.com in hardcover, paperback, or the Kindle ebook.
Thanks for joining us today for Fresh Oil with Pastor Keith Manley. Fresh Oil is an outreach of Grace Family Church in Rockford, Illinois, and can be heard each weekday at this same time. You can reach us online at weneedgod.com. Until next time, remember, God's love for you is unconditional, and He makes His mercies new every morning.